I'm pretty sure most of you have questions around what really happens. How do admission committees really evaluate applicants, right? What happens when you hit the submit button, correct? So we know that we have to write essays, we know we have to upload our documents, our transcripts, all of it. But what happens after we hit the submit button? That's really going to be the agenda that I have for you today, right? So we also have Ankita from Delhi applying this year. Great. So let's just get started with some basic ground rules. You see a Q&A box below. So in case you have a question, I'm going to be taking up some questions towards the end. So in case you have a question that you would like me to answer, please think through. I would be requesting you to type out the question in the Q&A. Please don't type anything else in the Q&A box. If anything, you please use the chat window, the window that you've been using so far. That is what I would prefer, that you put your thoughts on. But if you have a specific Q&A that you want me to take in the end, then put it in the Q&A box. I will try to answer as many questions, but I will try to keep the questions slightly generic so that a larger audience is benefited from it, right? And as always, in case you are not able to hear me, then please just check. It could be a problem at my end also, but in case one person is able to hear me, that's my thumb rule, right? In case one person is able to hear me, we will be kind of making sure that everyone else is able to hear. See, just again, I had a questions like, would you be providing recording of this webinar? Yes, we would be providing a recording of this webinar. Don't put such questions in the Q&A box. Please use the chat window for just general chit chat. Use Q&A window for specific questions regarding the content of what we have, right? So it will be helpful for us. Otherwise, just put it. Yes, the video will be available. In fact, I have something coming up for you. So that's really me. My name is Arun. In case you have seen me on YouTube, you probably know, that I like to share my thoughts about the GMAT, about MBA. You can follow me on LinkedIn. That's really, my LinkedIn ID, but you can just go search for Arun Jagannathan, and you can also contact me on my email ID that I've provided here, which is arunj@crackverbal.com, right? So very briefly, if I were to just tell you what I like to believe is that I try to keep things simple. I think when people get into this whole MBA journey, what happens? Okay, so question to all of you, are you able to hear me clearly? Are you able to hear me clearly? Am I loud and clear? Yeah, so in that case, I think that could be a problem with your mic. So my suggestion is, why don't you just go ahead and check the mic? And I would request others, I also have a co-host with me, Shrikla, but I would request others that in case anybody is finding a problem with the audio, just make sure that you check with others, right? And we'll make sure that if there is an issue at my end, we will kind of clarify. All right. So that's how you kind of reach out to me. As I was saying that what I like to believe is I like to keep things simple. I think what happens a lot of times is I'm being very honest with you. Okay. GMAT trainers and MBA consultants, right? See, I'll be very honest. This is not neurosurgery. Okay. This is not, it's not very complicated. And the reason why a lot of students in the journey feel very overwhelmed, and if you are overwhelmed, it's perfectly okay. I understand. I hear you. I hear the pain. I have a lot of students come and tell me that, Arun, if I go to the internet, I just go crazy because there is just so much information. And many a times this information could be conflicting. Correct. For example, I've heard students come and tell me that, oh, if I don't apply in round one, then, I can't apply in round two, right? Round one means I will get into Harvard. Round two means I'll get rejected by Great Lakes, right? Doesn't work that way, correct? So I like to keep things very logical. I try to keep things very simple. My intention is to give you an overall idea about the whole application journey. And hopefully by the end of this 1 hour, that's it. I'm going to expect you to be focused on this for about 1 hour, 60 minutes. And I can assure you that in this 60 minutes, I'm going to give you value. I'm going to ensure that from a perspective of applying to a B school, I'm going to be distilling my experience of having done that for over a decade, just mentoring people for applying to a B school and helping people get into some of the top programs into the world. So I'm kind of getting you that knowledge. I hope you're completely focused on it. Some of our students, and again, the reason I'm giving the kind of examples of these students is I just want to let you know that these are all students who are very similar to you, correct? These were all people who probably came from a background. Vikas Kaushal was in IT, Amiya was in IT, Sushiksha was in finance, right? People with 3 years experience, 5 years experience, 2 years experience. Saurabh Gupta was, he was in Zynga, he was a developer, correct? Ram Prasad was in consulting, he was in Ernst & Young, right? So these are all people who pretty much were like you, who started off their first GMAT scores were not very encouraging, but over a period of time, they just kind of persevered and they were able to kind of get to not just that dream GMAT score, but also, they were able to get an admit to the schools of their choice. And many of them are pursuing a very successful career right now. And the reason I'm kind of telling you this is because I want you to remember that all of them were in your shoes, right? I want you to remember a date, okay? I want you to put down that date. So I want you to put down the date of 21st September. 21st September 2020, right? So I'm going to say exactly 1 year from now, September 2020, if you are a CrackVerbal student, I would like your name over here, okay? Your GMAT score and the school that you got admitted, I would like to put it up over here. So the idea is all of you, whether you're CrackVerbal or not CrackVerbal students, but the idea is the next 1 year is going to be the most important in your life, where you are going to be able to make a difference in your career, right? So make sure that you are utilizing this 1 year very well. Just some of our mentors. So one of the things that we have believed is that the best people who can really advise you with regards to the whole MBA application process are people who have been there and done that. So we kind of not just handpick, each of these mentors for specific skills that they bring in. So one important criteria that I have for all the mentors who are part of the team is what I call as empathy. Correct. If you don't have an empathy as a mentor, it's going to be hard. The last thing that you want is someone who found it very easy to get into B school and thinks that life is very easy. Most of the mentors that we have, they understand the kind of background that people usually come from, the fact that they may not have many stories to differentiate themselves and so on, right? And that, I believe, is a very, very unique quality that all of our mentors possess, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of free resources in case you don't have it already. So the first one is the MBA Kickstarter Kit. So the MBA Kickstarter Kit is essentially everything that you wanted to know about the whole B school application process. So we have tried to kind of put it in the form of a video course. So I'm just giving you the link over here. So on the chat window, so please go ahead and click on it. In fact, go ahead and click on it. And this contains, it's a $99 course, but we are running a promo where we are giving it for $1. Please use the code CrackMBA2019 while checking out, right? So it includes videos from me. If you like my videos, if you've seen that on YouTube, pretty much this is a repository of that. Plus we have ebooks and we have a lot of nifty resources on this course. One more resource that I want to let you know about, in case you have already not seen this, is the CrackVerbal GMAT channel. So we have a lot of MBA analysis. So each of the top 30 schools, we have actually done a detailed analysis of their essays. We also have an MBA application strategy videos where we tell what are the mistakes you need to be avoiding in your application. Plus, we also have videos on GMAT in case you have not taken the GMAT. So that's another thing that we have, right? Just go to YouTube and search for CrackVerbal. There are also resources that you can find on our website, including the recording of all the webinars that we have had in the past. So that's again another. So at the time of checking out, Pratap, you just need to apply the coupon code. So when you go to checkout, at checkout, just apply this coupon code, Crack MBA 2019. Just apply this coupon code, and the price will drop to $1. Okay, and apart from that, as I was saying, you know, on our website there are a lot of resources. So I would encourage you to go ahead and have a look at those resources. All right. Great. So now let's get started with the main topic that we have. Just one thing I wanted to understand is that a lot of people are flooding the Q&A window. So this is a request for everyone. Please do not, you know, use Q&A windows. I've had people telling, hey, you know, and stuff like that. So if you could just please help me and keep the program organized. I would really request not to use the Q&A window for personal messaging. I'm not going to be looking at it. I'll just be picking the questions towards the end. So please make sure that you know, you put in your specific questions and not use it as a private chat with me. All right. So the first thing you need to know is the process, correct? So I'm just going to give you an overview of the process. So what happens the moment you hit the submit button is you're going to have like a 5-step process. First, people, you know, your application credentials are verified. Then someone is going to be reading that application. Then you have the interview process. Then there is a final decision, and then there is quality and profile adjustment. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through each of these steps and tell you what happens in each of these steps. The second thing that I'm going to tell you is when people read your application, I'm also going to be telling you what people look for when they see your application, right? So that's another thing. I'm going to tell you what are the 5 things that B-School admission committees want to see in your application. All right. So first step, verifying application credentials. Now, the moment you hit the submit button, correct, you understand that your application form has a lot of details, correct? So once the applications are submitted, it could either be a manual system or an automated system, but someone is going to review all the application in terms of completeness, correct? For example, it could be submission of your transcripts. It could be whether your recommendation letters have come in. It could be whether your application form is filled. It could be whether your GMAT scores have been submitted officially, whether your essays are kind of in place. So they just make sure that everything is in place. They are not going to review it for qualitative aspects. It's more in terms of ensuring that it's kind of in place. And some schools, so especially people who have gone through the Indian system, we know that there is a lot of bureaucracy, right? Where they say, acha, one small you know, error in the application form and your form gets rejected. Don't worry, most of the B schools in the world aren't like your bureaucratic setups, which means that they are very, they are typically lenient. So especially let's take a school like ISB, correct? You know, pretty much I've had every year people make some mistake here or there in the application form, and unless and until it's a huge error, right, people typically are okay with letting you, you know, go back and submit some other documents. For example, I remember one student last round, which is September 15th round, had incorrectly submitted some other document, right, instead of what was required. And the school kind of contacted him and said, hey, you know, we just got this document. Can you just upload the right document? And he just did it, and it was fine. The typical reasons why schools are strict and why they will not process your application is typically regarding test scores. Okay. For example, there are some schools Majority of the schools in the US require either the GMAT or the GRE score, but there are some schools which might still require TOEFL or IELTS scores. Out of, let's say, 100 schools, there are going to be 10 schools that will require it, right? So about 10% of schools require such scores. Now, what happens is if you have not taken the TOEFL, for example, right? Let me give you an example of a student who applied to MIT and Haas Berkeley. So he had applied to MIT and Haas Berkeley, and it so happened that his TOEFL scores were not in. And for that reason, he had to postpone his. So they took in his application. They said, okay, submit the TOEFL scores next week. So it was just, he was taking the TOEFL a week after the deadline. And he said, hey, rest of my application is in. I will let you know my TOEFL scores next week. Correct? Why don't you consider me for round one? But the school said, no, we will take in your application. But because your scores are not in, we will not be considering it for round one. We will take it in round two. Correct? So sometimes schools can, especially when it comes to things like test scores, can be a little script, right? One important thing over here is if you have not filled out an application form so far, you are in for a big surprise, okay? You essentially will realize that most of these, schools, right, the application form has a lot of details, right? And this is where students usually don't understand that the application form is not just name and work experience, but it contains a lot of small details. It contains things like your previous employer, reason for leaving your previous employers. In some case, it may even ask for your salary. Correct? Why are they asking for the salary? Because they want to make sure that because they have an assessment of what are the kind of salary ranges in each country. So they believe that if you are claiming that you are the vice president of new product development, correct, then your salary also has to be commensurate. So sometimes they ask for salary details. So the application form can be laborious. So my suggestion is, make sure that you start filling out your application as soon as you start your essays. Just go into the school website, go to the login page, create your login, use your email address and create a login. And what you can do once you create a login is you can parallelly start filling out details, right? So typically there will be 5 or 6 tabs, right? Your personal, your professional history, your extracurriculars, your academics. So start filling out, and it's a very clerical work, but maybe 30 minutes, an hour over a couple of days should get that filled out. And once you have filled out 1 or 2 schools, it is a lot easier for you to fill the other schools. And here is one more pro tip. Typically on the day of, on the deadline, you will realize that many times the website crashes. I know for a fact that the ISB website has been crashing on the day of the deadline for the last couple of years. And the good news is, by the way, if it crashes, most schools will give you an extension, correct? So they are not this thing about it. It's a technical reason they will give. But what happens, we tend to stress. Just imagine you tried applying and you weren't able to apply because the website went down, right? And there is no way to contact ISB, correct? And you are going to be stressed thinking, whether my application is going to be considered this round or not, and unnecessarily lose sleep. So my suggestion, please go ahead and apply at least a couple of days before the deadline, all right? So now that we have kind of done the process of checking, verifying the application, the second step is the admission committee. So AdComm is actually an abbreviated, smaller form, not abbreviated. It's a contracted form of admission committee. So every school has an admission committee that will typically consist not just of team whose sole job is to hire, but it may also contain people from the academic side, like the dean or certain professors could be pulled in temporarily for a couple of months to help manage the application season, right? Because typically there are 2 rounds. So these schools, if you see, that is the reason round 2 is on January. Because January first week, because most of the US and European schools are shut towards the end of December.
which is why R2 is actually January. So this is actually a team, a set of people. Um, and what happens, and this is one other misnomer, one other, thing that people believe. They think that once I apply, I am going to be in this big pool of applicants from all over the world, right? Not true, okay? You are not going to be in a separate pool. In fact, you are going to be segmented right at the start, okay? What is a segmentation? Segmentation is either, like, typically they take demographics, which means they take your industry, they take your country, and they take your, let's say, GMAT scores, correct? So if you are an Indian, correct, with a particular GMAT score, and you belong to a particular industry or a particular group, right, you kind of end up getting into a particular segment. Do schools release what these are? No school will do that, right? See, unlike, you can't put a RTI and ask them to say, okay, how many Indians are you going to take this year? But pretty much remember that every school has a quota, and they are going to stick to that quota of how many Indians I'm going to take. And within these Indians also, they know I am going to get X percentage of people from the IT sector. I'm going to get Y percentage of people from the finance sector. And I'm also going to take X number of women, Y number of men. So they do have a sense. It is not a hard and fast number, but they do have these quotas. They do have a sense of how much they are going to be taking, correct? So now that you have actually segmented into the groups, correct? A person is going to be reading your application, and while they read your application, they are going to be considering things like, so typically I'll tell you how long a application is read, and this might come as a shock to many of you, but typically the first, like after the evaluation, the first round of evaluation, when a person in the admission committee is reading your application, typically he is going to be spending, no more than 15 to 20 minutes. So let's see how this happens, correct? So typically what happens is when people give out, just one second, I'm just looking at that. So when people, look at it, it's usually a person from the, just one second. Yeah. So these are people who could be, current students. These could be students from the admission committee. And what they do when they read the application is they are looking for factors. For example, they are looking at, quantitative measures. They are saying, and this is where it can be a little, little hard for a lot of people to take in, but the quantitative measure could be GMAT. For example, if you are applying to a top 10 school in the US, it's going to be very, very hard for you to be in a normal, let's say, Indian group, right? Indian IT, Indian finance, Indian manufacturing, Indian startup, Indian whatever else, right? If you are in one of these pools, if you don't have a high enough GMAT score, they may end up rejecting you without an interview just based on your GMAT score, correct? So think of GMAT as the security guard or the chowkidar who's sitting outside the gate. A GMAT score is not enough. No, even if you get a very high GMAT score, it's not a guarantee that you're going to get into the B school. But a low GMAT score will almost always keep you out. Okay. A low GMAT score is going to keep you out. So a score of, let's say, 650 for a top 10, top 15 US school, I can pretty much tell you, unless and until your surname is Ambani, right, you are not going to be able to make it, correct? So important for us to realize that. So once the applications are read, then you are called for an interview. They usually have various ways in which they do it. One way in which they do it is there is no prioritization. They just go in as a first come, first serve basis. So in case you are getting an interview call, but your friend is not getting an interview call, or your friend has gotten an interview call, or you have read on GMAT Club that people are getting their interview calls, but you are not getting one, don't panic, don't stress. Usually it is just a question of, them going through various rounds. right? So they just have only so much bandwidth. So they will take the first set of 50 applicants, then they go to the next 50 and so on. But sometimes it can also happen that the reading of the application is based on some kind of quantitative criteria. Now, what is a quantitative criteria? Let us say that I'm just giving you an example, right? Please don't take that to be like, this. One example of that is, let's say that there is this guy, Bit Pilani, 770 GMAT, started his own startup, got acquired, within 3 years, that's the kind of profile that he has. Is currently now an angel investor, looking at doing an MBA, 26 years of age. I would want to interview him first, and I'll tell you why. Because these schools also are competing for talent, correct? So, in some cases, it may happen that if they feel that there is a very strong profile and they use some quantitative measures, you may be getting a priority interview, right? So that's what really is, which is, once I've read it, it may happen that the interview is extended on a preset quantitative criteria. Let me just give you some examples of what happens in some of the top schools in the world, right? So let us take a school like Chicago Booth. So if you are applying to Chicago Booth this year, right, this is pretty much what is going to happen. When you submit your application, it is going to be read by a first or a second year student. Now, you may wonder, saying that, Arun, but how is it that a student would eventually end up, looking at my application? Would he have the power to decide whether to keep me in or out? The answer to that is no. He is not going to have the power to keep you in or out. Okay. He is just going to do the administrative task of ensuring that, there is some amount of, like what I mentioned earlier, which is the quantitative measures. So he's going to take you across those quantitative measures, and he's going to give us recommendation. Now, recommendation typically comes in 3 categories. It could either be, yes, I think he's a good candidate. B, I am not sure, maybe. 3, I don't like him, reject. Correct? Now, irrespective of what his recommendation is, it will always be followed by a second read from an admissions committee member. Now, why is the student, important? Because let us assume that you are the admission committee member, correct? And you have a student who's basically saying, look, I've just looked at these 100 applications. There are these, 40 applications that seems to be very good. Have a look at it. There are another 50 applications where I'm not very sure, but there are these 10 applications which I surely think should be rejected. Now, what may happen is, when such a thing is provided to the admission committee member, by like just human nature, the admission committee member might get influenced, right? So that sense, the student is playing an important role, but it is not going to be his opinion or his judgment. It has to be read by an admission committee member. And here's the beauty of it, especially at Booth. Even after the second read, correct, the admission committee will decide whether or not to invite the candidate, which means the admission committee member, okay, he goes and he proposes to the admission committee. So they usually have these meetings, right? So in these meetings, they discuss about various cases, and he will say, look, this is the reason that I feel that this candidate should not be rejected. And all the candidates who are denied an interview, correct, the admission director actually has a final review. Just think about it. Now there are 3 reviews. Students saw it, the admission committee member saw it, it was discussed in the admission committee meeting, and then the admission director also made sure that people being rejected without interview, they are given their fair chance. So you realize most these schools take this process very seriously, because their entire brand is based on the quality of people they are getting in. Just as any company values the kind of employees, all B schools value the kind of incoming class. And yeah, so all other applications continue through the process. This is the rejected ones, but the others, they continue through the process and may be read for a total 5 or 6 times. Just think about it. 3 times is only for people being rejected. If you are selected, it is being read even more. For example, the person taking the interview is going to be doing one more round of review. And as we will be seeing in step 3 and 4, these are now read finally before the offer is made. So multiple times that it is reviewed. Let's look at one more school. Let's look at Wharton. Okay, so let's see how Wharton does this. So Wharton, again, each application is read by a second year student. Now, this is a paid position, which means Wharton says that I don't want you to do it for free. We are going to be paying you money to do that, but anybody cannot just do it. They have a training process. They have a fixed set of criteria that they need to look at it. They try to keep subjectivity out, try to keep it as objective as possible, and hence, this is so either you are a trainee, in which case you don't get paid, but if you are part of the committee as a student, you get paid. You need to follow the process. After which, again, there is a second read from an admissions committee member, correct? Now, after the admission committee member reads it, the admission director will read all the files, and it is he, along with consultation with the admission committee member, who will decide whether they are called for an interview or not, okay? And then post all of it, post interview, all files will be reread by an admissions committee member and again by the director to ensure that absolutely every application that has come in, the criteria are being applied uniformly. There is no case of any kind of omissions. So they take a lot of care. And I'll just put one point over here. In case you have been reading the news, you will realize that at an undergrad level, there has been a lot of, there have been these scandals around celebrities wanting to send their children to Ivy League schools and spending money. So B schools are also impacted. So they also are open to scrutiny. Many of these B schools have opened their processes to independent auditing firms. So they make sure that the quality is being maintained, correct? Now, the reason I'm telling you all of this is because from a perspective of understanding the process, right? So you know that when it kind of gets sent, there is a lot of thought given into it, correct? Now, here is the fourth step, and this is a step that a lot of people are unaware of, right? So far, the three steps you might be aware of, but this step, I'm assuming a lot of people might be unaware of, correct? Which is quality and profile adjustment. What happens over here is B schools set up a preliminary class profile, which means they have a sense, they work with the recruiting team, they look at the industry, they look at various things, and they say what should be the kind of class profile that we are looking for. So they have a general sense, and once the candidates are selected, okay, what they do internally is they adjust it to ensure that people from underrepresented communities, and when I say underrepresented, even women come under underrepresented, correct? So if you are a woman applicant versus a male applicant, all things being equal, a female applicant has a higher chance than a male applicant, correct? Again, all things being equal, right? Which means that, let's say, same GMAT scores, same kind of work experience, same background, same extracurriculars, or rather similar extracurriculars, then pretty much the woman has a greater chance of getting it, correct? They also take things like, for example, higher GMAT scores, right? And this is something that people don't realize, but if you are a B school and if you are kind of tethered to this whole B school ranking business, right? B school rankings, think about it. Forbes ranking came up, ISB was declared the best school in Asia, some other school got ranked, so on. So what are these rankings really based on? Okay, apart from subjective criteria, one of the objective criteria that most of these rankings take into consideration is the average GMAT score of the incoming class. And one way to bump up the average GMAT score is, I have a software engineer from Bangalore who worked in an IT company and is applying. One of them has a 760, the other one has a 710. There is no reason for me to pick the 710 over the 760, correct? So I'm going to go for a higher GMAT score. And what may also happen is, when you get a lot of candidates from the same pool, right? Let us say chartered accountant applying from India, right? Now, a chartered accountant applying from India typically would have been working for either PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, would be with Ernst& Young, would be with Deloitte, would be with KPMG, correct? These are the top auditing firms. Now, what has happened is in India, just think about it. All of them are chartered accountants. All of them have done their BK, BCom. All of them are chartered accountants. All of them working for an auditing firm. Then they are going to say, well, there is just way too many people with this kind of a profile. And again, remember that the profiles keep changing every year. For example, one new thing that I've seen is, this thing about startups, correct? So I have seen, at least in the last 2 years, so many people, ex-Flipkart, ex-Zomato, ex-Swiggy, ex-Ola, ex-Uber, you know what, I was part of the founding team, I did this. Also, I'm getting a lot of people who quit their jobs and started up on their own. So in case you are in this category and you think that you are underrepresented, the answer is no. It is still an overrepresented category, correct? So now what they do is, you might have been selected. Just imagine, right? Sometimes you would be rejected just because there is another candidate who is probably, similar to you, but has a better GMAT score or comes from a different country, correct? Comes from an underrepresented country, right? So what they do, they actually, before they release, they actually create this class profile and try to fit it in. Sometimes the final adjustments include the dean and the assistant dean, because they also have the brand equity of the school. So they are trying to, send out a message. Like, for example, there are schools which are very clear. They are saying that we are aiming for a higher representation among women, correct? So there are very clear goals. So they may say that the incoming class needs to have at least 33% girls or 40% girls, right? Women candidates. So in those cases, those kind of inputs are taken in. People who applied in round 1 who are waitlisted could be checked in round 2, correct? And one thing that I wanted to say was, what I started off with, which is the difference between round 1 and round 2. Unlike what most people think, the difference is not as stark. Okay, it is not as big. First round mein you apply, you get into Harvard. As I said, second round you apply, you get rejected by all schools. It doesn't work that way, correct? This criteria of profile adjustment, of quality adjustment, correct, is going to happen, right? So whether you apply in round 1 or round 2, you are still going to be either a victim of this or you are going to be a beneficiary of this. Right? You understand why I'm saying victim and beneficiary. If you are in an overrepresented category, you are a victim. If you are in an underrepresented category, you become a beneficiary of this process. Correct? So this is a very important process that they do. So even if qualitatively you would have been selected, your interview went well, your essays were great, but just that year, they got someone with a very similar profile. I want to give you one example of a student, right? And this was couple of years ago, and he had applied to INSEAD, correct? And he had great experience. He had worked, as a trader. He had worked in Africa. He had worked in Middle East. Very, very diverse international profile, and very surprisingly, it was a very ideal INSEAD profile, right? Like the kind of candidates that INSEAD likes. A great GMAT scores, great undergrad, had interest in drama, theater. But he got rejected, and we were very surprised. And interestingly, after the results came out, and he actually ended up joining a top school in UK. But he later on got to know that his boss, okay, not really his boss, but someone in the organization, but someone who was higher up, had applied in round 1. He had applied in round 2, but this guy had applied in round 1, and he had gotten it. Correct. So just imagine, same company, same kind of work, perhaps same similar profile, has already gotten round 1. Why should I be taking you in round 2? Correct. So these are the kind of things that happen. But finally, so in general, if you are an overrepresented applicant, better to apply in round 1. But again, as I said, if you have not applied in round 1, you missed September, October deadline, no problem. Apply in the January deadline. You are not going to be penalized. If you are in the overrepresented committee, group, anyways, this is going to catch up on you, right? But just applying in round 1 might make some more sense to you. Now, all of this happens. Finally, admission committee says, well, you have gotten in. So what the admission committee might do is it might still meet to discuss some of the profiles, because what they typically do is they create a list of A, confirmed candidates, candidates to whom they are going to give the admission. B, they also create a list of waitlisted candidates. These could be candidates who are waitlisted from round 1 and round 2. So they basically combine it and say the final list of waitlisted candidates. They will also give you a date by which you will hear from them. Otherwise, there is a character in Hindu mythology called Trishanku. You will be kind of stuck in the middle, right? Because waitlist is a very bad place to be in, because you have not got selected, but you have still not got rejected, right? It's almost like, you're waiting for a girl to say yes, and you just kind of anxious, and time is going away. You can't look at other people because you don't know if that person is going to come back. So it can be a very painful place for you to be in, right? Or the third, and perhaps an easier or a simpler thing, is for you to get rejected, in which case schools will give you a rejection letter. Now, a couple of things over here. The first thing that I want you to understand is that, the schools themselves are looking at improving their yield percentage. Now, what is yield percentage? Yield percentage is the total number of people accepting an offer upon the total number of people who are offered it in the first place, correct? So A, you are offered, of that people who are offered, how many accepted? You might think that for a school like Harvard, that number should be 100%, but the answer is the top yield percentage for any school is actually Harvard. And guess what it is? It is around 92 or 93%. Which means out of every 100 people who are offered a seat at Harvard Business School MBA program, class of 2021, 7 people refused it. They declined. They said, I don't want to join your school. Correct? Now, who are these people, right? Why would they decline Harvard? They are probably the people who got into Stanford with the financial aid, correct? So financial aid is a very important component of the yield percentage, and most B schools understand it. So what they will do is, while they announce the result, they will also be letting you know whether you got any kind of financial aid, whether you got any kind of tuition waiver, whether you got any kind of scholarship. So they will let you know. And the beauty of it is, I know for a fact that many of the top schools, they personally call the students. See, again, in order to improve the yield rate, right, they want you to feel excited about joining the school. So what you will realize is, till the time you interview, till the time you get the admission, you are in some sense behind the school, right? Like you are trying to woo the school, impress the school, especially if you're in a wait list, you are going to be, kind of dancing around saying, hey, I'm going to give you an additional recommendation letter. By the way, I just got a new promotion, or I retook my GMAT. Here is my higher GMAT score. But the moment you get admission, the B school is after you. Right? So they're going to be sending you fancy brochures. So they send a very nice welcome kit, application kit. Most of the top schools, it has things including t-shirts, sweaters. They also have an alum meet. So they will invite you for, exclusive meets within India, because they are now trying to impress you. They are now trying to convince you to join the school, right? So that's pretty much how the 5 steps work. So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions just to understand if you are on the same page. How many of you have taken the GMAT? I'm just curious. How many of you have taken the GMAT? All right. So I see that, some of you have taken the test, but many of you are, in fact, I'm finding it interesting that many of you are also looking at retaking the test. Those of you who are looking at retaking the test, I have something interesting for you. Make sure that you reach out to someone in the team. We have a special program that is meant only for retakers, and we are planning to roll it out in the next couple of weeks. So those who are retaking, please have a look at it. Great. So, I just wanted to know that. I see that some people have not responded. So here is a question. So far, I'm going to get into the next topic. But before that, Are you finding this webinar useful? Yeah, so just go ahead and let me know so that I kind of get a sense. I'll be also looking at the various parameters, various factors required to evaluate a particular candidate. So I'm going to get into that. Thanks so much. Overwhelming majority of people, in fact, almost everyone is saying that they are finding this webinar very useful. So thanks a lot. What I'm going to do is, Shrikla, I'm just going to quickly get into the questions, and I'm going to see if there is any question that I could possibly answer at this point. So I don't see any question based on what I have said so far. So I will probably move on because, yeah. So Tejas, I'm going to be talking about that. So I'll be talking about that shortly. Okay. So again, the questions that I'm asking is based on what I said. I see a lot of people asking me questions about that profile. Don't worry, I got a solution for you. I'll be letting you know what it is. But let me get there. I'll see if there are any questions. But if you can ask me questions about what we are discussing, it would be helpful, so that I can kind of shed further light into that. All right. So let's look at what are the criteria to evaluate a red application, right? So now they are looking, now I'm going to get into the actual criteria they used while they are reading your application, okay? In general, I'm going to boil it down to 5 things that they are going to look at, okay? Your academic ability, leadership and teamwork, personal background, career potential and goals, and your extracurricular involvement. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this one by one. Okay, so let's look at all the 5. Okay, so I'm going to start with the academic ability part. Okay, so what is academic ability? What is it that they are looking at, right? So what they are really looking at is your ability to handle coursework, right? So they are saying that, is this a person who can handle the rigorous, and strenuous academic workload that you are expected to have when you get to a B school? There is a very interesting, book on this. It's actually by second year Stanford MBA student. So I'll just give you the link of that book. You can find it on Amazon. So let me just give it to you once again. It's called Snapshots from Hell. I'll just try to give you the, yeah, so it's a great book. Read about it. You will see that by the way, any question that you have for me, Divyanshu, Tejas, I won't be looking at the chat window. Please post it on the Q&A box, please. All right. So why I gave you that book is because, you think that a USB school is easy. You think that quantitative load is not high. You are going to be mistaken. Just the amount of Excel that you need to learn, right, is mind-boggling. It can be incredible. You actually get into things like calculus in some of the subjects, right? Especially the quantitative subjects. So if you don't remember calculus, integration, differentiation from 12th, you actually end up doing it for some of the courses. So they are looking at your ability to handle coursework, and they are going to obviously reward things like if you are from a top engineering program where, let's say, relative grades were used, correct? Then they are going to say, well, this is a tougher job for me to survive in an engineering college where I'm going to be surrounded by smart people, as opposed to, let's say, I'm not trying to be, demeaning or belittling any program, but let's say you did a BA from some local college, then obviously the B school is going to, kind of weigh that, right? IIT Bombay, computer science, BA from, let's say, a local college, right? Obviously, there is going to be a difference. But again, this is a gradient, right? So not every difference is IIT Bombay and, Jalgaon University. Most cases, it's like a gradient, like NIT, IIT, BITS, it's kind of going to be at some level. Other schools are at, let's say, a different level. And these schools have figured out how to, look at these schools. They have got applicants from India for the last many years. So they have a very good sense of how to assess your marks. In fact, one thing that I have is if you have percentages, unless and until the school insists, and no school really does that, but please do not convert it to your GPA. If you want to convert it to your GPA, there are some services available. For example, there is one service that I'm aware of, which is called WES.org. So if you go to WES.org, I think they give you a way by which you can convert your percentage to a GPA, the US GPA system, but I wouldn't really bother too much about that. Okay. Now coming specifically to, So coming specifically to one thing is your GMAT score, correct? So if you have been out of the school for a long time, I had a couple of people asking me, do they look at people with 10 years, 12 years experience? If you have 10, 12 years experience, then very clearly they are interested to know whether you have the aptitude to handle academic course load. So a GMAT score in that case also becomes important for you to convince the admission committee that yes, I have got what it takes to survive 1 or 2 years of a rigorous B school program, correct? So let me just quickly see if there is, Karthik asked this question about chartered accountancy, which is CA. Don't worry, they do look at CA, correct? So that's not a problem. So do they look for GRE scores? Yeah, if you have a GRE score, try to get a GRE score in excess of 330, but I would say 325 plus could be a safe. So I would say 330 plus, great. 325 plus, still a safe score. So that's as far as academic is concerned, correct? All right, so I'm going to now go to the next one, which is, so by the way, one tip, which is in case you are looking at studying for the GMAT, just one point I would like to offer, which is, try to look for a GMAT study program that fits with your learning, whether it's classroom or online. CrackVerbal offers online programs. In case you have not done so, you can have a look at our online program, and we help students get into top schools. So we understand the requirement for a high GMAT score. So the course also is kind of tailored to help you meet, let's say, a Quant 50, a verbal score of over 40. We have modules, we have ways, we have questions that we discuss which are of that level. And in general, if you do have a poor undergrad record, I've had people come and tell me that, Arun, that was me when I was in college 8 years ago or 6 years ago, and that was a different person. And, anybody who has a few years of experience, you can look back at the time that you were in college, you will realize that it was a very different world back then. Maybe you did not have the maturity, maybe you did not have the kind of clarity in terms of what you wanted to do. Maybe engineering was not your calling in life. Maybe whatever you did was not the calling in your life, which is what I think is the bane for 90% of Indians, right? We end up doing graduation without really realizing what our true strengths lie in. And it's only when we start working that we discover that. It's perfectly okay for you to pick the optional essay and to discuss why you got a low score in your undergrad, correct? But remember, use this only if you think you got a really low percentage. I've had people with 70% kind of just writing the optional essay, oh, I should have got a 90%, but I felt sick. I got typhoid in second year. I got malaria in third year. I got, something, diphtheria, TB, polio, right, in fourth year. Don't do that, right? Don't try to make this as an excuse that I was sick and hence I could not score well. Pretty much it's 4 years or 3 years of your degree. They got their entire transcripts. If you're not well throughout the period, then, they probably don't want you in the B school also, thinking that if you come there also, you will fall sick, right? So don't write reasons like that in your optional essay. Just keep it simple. Just say, hey, I was a different person. Look at now my GMAT scores. Look at, the other coursework that I've done, which can potentially compensate for a lower undergrad record. The second thing that they're going to look at is your career potential and goals, right? So typically they are looking at people with about 4 to 5 years experience, which means you have enough, experience, you have enough clarity. What is it that you want in your life? And they are looking at people who are very clear. So I'll put it in a simple way. B schools want students who are employable. What is the word? Employable. Employable means after the MBA, the B school should not sweat thinking how would I place him, right? So many times people say, oh, I have a very unconventional background. Great, if you have an unconventional background, how many people are going to offer you a job? If you are a chartered accountant working in Ernst & Young, right, though you may be overrepresented, one thing that I can guarantee is you are very employable. If you are a tech guy from India, if you are a software engineer, right, who understands technology, who understands nuts and bolts, I know that you can speak the language of programming, right? So even after an MBA, I can make you a product manager, right? Because technology is universal. Whether you take US or India, technology is technology, correct? So in that sense, you are very employable. Are you overrepresented? Yes. Are you employable? Oh, sorry. Are you overrepresented? Is that a negative? Yes. Are you employable? Is that a positive? That is also yes. In fact, let me give you a very different profile. Let us say that there is a music player and we have had someone with that profile. So he actually was part of a band. He was a musician and he had done some course in acoustics. He had done BA, but very poor, undergraduate record. Because he wasn't focused, he was focused on music. He did music for about 10 years. Now he wanted to, get into a B school and he wanted to get into this whole media space, right? So he wanted to be in the media and entertainment space. The thing is great, but how many people in the media and entertainment space are going to go to a B school to recruit, as opposed to recruiting people using their network? Because usually such jobs come in because of network rather than a pedigree, correct? So that guy, is he unique? Is his profile very unique? Is he very, kind of this? The answer is yes. But is he employable? The answer is no, correct? So that's where kind of you need to show the B school that, look, I can achieve my goal, which is where clarity of goal becomes very important. You can't just go to the B school and say, hey, you know what? I got it all figured. I know what I need to do. And if you have experience working for companies like, let's say, Apple, Google, I'm just giving examples, right? But if you are working for Apple, let's say, or you're working for Google, you're working for Microsoft, you're working, and these are all tech companies. I could give you non-tech companies also. Let's say you're working for Goldman Sachs, right? Now, these are also pedigree. All the 4 consulting firms that I mentioned, these are also pedigree, right? So the harder it is for you to get into a company, the more valued that company becomes. How hard is it to get into Google? How hard is it to get into Wipro? I'm just giving an example. I don't want to be, I don't want to demean Wipro. By the way, I used to work in Wipro at some point in my life, correct? So I'm not at all saying that Wipro is a brand employer. I'm just saying that it's easier for you to get into Wipro than for you to get into Google, and the B schools value that. They are looking for consistency in your career goals. They want to make sure that you understand where you are going, correct? So make sure that your career story, need for an MBA is clear, specific, and is targeted for that particular B school. What are the strengths of the B school? Are you fitting into that? That's the part that you need to be writing in the application. The third thing they are looking for is leadership and teamwork. Last thing they want is, if you look at the first 2 points, I could get this guy, IIT Delhi, 9.5 CGPA, 770 GMAT, worked in Google for, let's say, 2 years, has like a bunch of patents to his name. But, right, if this guy is going to come in, but is not going to really help the class environment, if he's going to turn out to be this 800-pound gorilla, right, who has never seen failure in his life, who's a self-absorbed person. You know what I'm saying? Like some people who just think that they are, the eighth wonder of the world. If you're going to get someone like that, it's going to corrupt the culture of the B school. So what they are also looking at is, does this person have the empathy? Does he have the leadership, the teamwork, right? So you need to be able to show that you have, kind of managed. If you have managed people, try to show that, try to show your people skills, correct? And B schools have plenty of essays where they are going to be asking you this. They are going to be asking you for instances where you've worked in difficult situations, in trying situations. They're going to ask you questions on, tell me a time when you worked with a diverse set of people. Tell us about a time that you had to lead from the front. What did you do? Very important that you demonstrate that you have the leadership skills, that you are comfortable working with teams. And also, right, if you are able to show promotions, because think about it, if you are in a big company and you actually got promoted 3 times in the last 4 years, it actually tells me that people who work with you, because the B school is going to spend only 30 minutes looking at your profile. But what about the people who have spent 3-4 years every day, every working day with you, sitting next to you, right? Your boss who's evaluating you every day. What does he think about you, correct? So if you have got promotions, that tells me that you are able to positively influence the environment around you. Otherwise, just think about it. You tell me all these stories about leadership and teamwork, and I see that you have not been promoted in the last 3 years, correct? That is going to tell me that, look, great stories, but unfortunately, people around you at work don't seem to agree with your point of view, right? Otherwise, you would have been promoted. The other angle to pick for leadership and teamwork is also to highlight non-work leadership or experiences where you have indirectly led work teams, especially if you don't have a management kind of role, management kind of position. You can always talk about the examples where you ended up working in a place where you indirectly influenced, correct? So let me do this. Let me kind of give you some examples, correct, of how you could showcase this. So here is one example: hand selected by a vice president to lead a special task force to reduce company inventory costs. By the way, these are all examples that I'm picking from students who have applied over the last few years, correct, of what could be examples. Founded a competitive cyclist club and organized competitions to raise funds for a charity. So this particular applicant, he used to go for what is called as a brevet. It's a term that I did not know about, but he used to cycle, 200, 300 kilometers, right? You know what I'm saying, 200, 300 kilometers of cycling. He was this hardcore cycling enthusiast. So he said, how can I make a difference, right? That cycling is a passion that I have, but how do I make a difference? So he was, by the way, working for an IT company, right? But he did cycling on the side. So he organized competitions where he was able to raise fund for a charity. Great example of leadership, right? Manage 5 client teams through a process reengineering project. If you do very high-tech work, trust me, B schools value that, correct? It's not that B schools value only people who have a business degree or who speak management jargon. They understand that to be successful in today's corporate world, you need to be wearing both the hats, the technical hat at some times and the business hat at some times. The MBA program offers you the business hat, but they want to check whether you also can wear the technical hat, correct? So that's where this becomes important. Again, some examples. So make sure that you brainstorm all of your past activities. Look for instances of even indirect leadership. So students, when they come to me, they say, Arun, but I don't think I have a lot of examples. But during the whole application brainstorming process, when we sit and when we discuss, we realize that there are a lot of things that the person could have said, which they think is not important, but which can be messaged in a very positive way, which can be shown in terms of the impact that you're able to create. I believe anyone who's lived a purposeful life of 25 plus years has, or 22 plus years, will have stories. It is just a question of picking the stories and putting it in the right way. Fourth thing that they look for is extracurricular. They're saying, look, I again, have this guy who has got all this leadership, his great work experience, great academic background, but I want someone interesting, correct? Someone who can contribute to the class. How can I contribute? How can I say that I'm different? How can I say that I'm special, correct? So people are looking for extracurricular commitment, involvement, because some sense it is also telling me about your leadership skills, correct? And they are not looking at involvement just in college. They are also looking at involvement post-college. I have had students come and tell me, Arun, I was part of this particular cultural committee in college. I did this in college, that in college, but that was all 4 years ago. Till then, since then, because of work, I have not been able to do much. Unfortunately, you cannot be using stories which are so dated. Plus, a lot of college involvement, very honestly, how many people were there in your committee? What was your role? I see that a lot of people fudge things about involvement in college. And typically the stories revolve around them being part of some sponsorship drive that they help the college raise X dollars, Y dollars. You know, though it could be true stories, I'm not trying to question that part. I'm just saying that it's too common, and there are a lot of people who unfortunately are also lying. So the people who are telling the truth, their value also goes down, because there is no way, unless and until your name came in the newspaper, correct? And you are like, kind of, you got like an award for it. If you are just part of some committee at college or even at work, right? If you're just part of, I was part of the tree plantation drive. All of us went, 50 kilometers away from Mumbai. We went to this place. We did a tree plantation drive. It's one day, it's like a picnic, correct? So people are looking at something where you were involved in the community, correct? And you had some kind of a leadership role. That's another thing, right? So not only were you involved, but you also had some kind of a leadership, which means you were not a participant. You were, in some sense, the person who was involved in crafting that thing, correct? That's what you want to show. So in case you are not part of an NGO, or if you have just joined an NGO in July or August with the intent of putting it into your B School application, my advice, do not, okay? Do not do that. It is just going to reduce your chances, because if they were to assume that if you don't have NGO experience, they may assume that this guy is shallow. But if you're going to join an NGO in July and try to put that in your essay, you will confirm to them that yes, you are a shallow person. Okay, you don't want to do that. Some examples of extracurricular that I can give over here. I had someone who led the fundraising campaign for a local NGO. So it's not that he contributed money. I've had students come to me every year and say, I contribute, 1,000 rupees every year to this particular cause. That is not what is called as extracurricular activities, right? It is just a EMI in some sense that is getting, that is going from your bank. That doesn't require your, talent, your competence, your time, your energy. That's what they are looking for. They are not looking for only money. So this person, he actually raised, a significant, amount for this NGO, and he's been involved in that NGO. It was for the Spastic Society of India. He was involved with the Spastic Society for many years, and there was a personal reason, because his younger sister, was a spastic, so he understood the needs of specially challenged people. He understood that a lot of times if you go to malls, if you go to buildings, it is not very friendly for people who are specially challenged. So, he even did awareness around it. So, it has to be a cause that has had significant meaning to you, correct? It has a personal connection. There is a reason why you're doing it. You've been doing it for enough number of years, correct? And by the way, all of what you're going to put over here, please expect to be questioned on it in the interview. So I'll tell you what happened. The person I'm talking about, he went to ISB. In the interview, there was a doctor. And I don't know if it was by design or by default, but there was a doctor. And the doctor started asking him questions. Okay, if you are a spastic child, when will the parent get to know, right? At what age? What are the ways in which, there are, certain things that go into, helping them. So, the question, he was questioned for about 10 to 12 minutes on that topic. And the beauty is, because he had worked, because, of personal reasons, he knew so well. He said, it was such a nice discussion. I loved it. But remember, if someone had fibbed about their extracurriculars, because there is no way for them to really look for any kind of factual verification, right? They are not going to say, oh, show me, a picture of you going to this place, or show me a certificate. They are not looking at all of that. So when they are questioning, many a times when people fib, they fake, they get caught, and then they come back and they say it was a stress interview. It was not a stress interview. It was a normal interview. You got stressed because you wrote things that you are not able to defend. So make sure whatever you're writing, you're also able to defend it. Correct? Some other examples, it need not always be for a very egalitarian reason, for a very altruistic reason that you are here for Samaj Seva, Desh Seva and all that. It could even be something as small as you could say that my friend had a startup. I basically headed the marketing till he got a full-time person because I'm interested in marketing. That's my hobby. I love doing it, right? I'm on these forums. I'm giving advice to people, correct, on marketing because that's really my love of my life. Okay, perfectly normal, right? So just go ahead and say that. And again, I had one more person, he actually, I'll just give an example so that you get a sense. He actually ended up, uh, coordinating the alumni reunion for his school, not his batch, okay, for his entire school. He kind of created this alumni portal. He got in touch with all of it. He in fact created like a trust. He called all the teachers. It was a grand function that was held in a hotel where people from all over the country, even people abroad, had come in. They formed a proper reunion. They formed an alumni committee, right? And he was the president of that alumni committee, right? 6 months of his life, he said, I spent only in organizing this alumni reunion, correct? So even something simple as that, see, what they are really looking at is they are looking at an X factor, correct? Something extra that I cannot get from your undergrad, I cannot get from your GMAT scores. And finally, after everything, they also look for your personal background, correct? They are looking at what is your story, what is your background, where did you come from, how is that influenced your life. One thing is for a fact that a lot of who we are, and I'm sure you would also agree, is based on our narrative, our background, the way we see the world, correct? Your upbringing, your childhood, many of those kind of end up impacting who you are today. So they are looking at personal stories. Essays are a great way to tell stories. Why are you the person you are today? Correct? Tell me who you are. That's one thing that people, schools ask. And over there, they are saying, apart from all these numbers, apart from all these statistics, apart from all these activities, tell me, in essence, what makes you who you are. So people tell various stories. I have had someone who came from the army background. His father was posted in the army, and he said, something very interesting. He said, every 2 years, we had to shift, correct? I was always the kid who walked into a new school where everyone was looking at me, judging me because, I was the new kid, right? And he said, every time it happened that by the time I was in 8th or 10th standard, it was very normal for me. I actually started looking forward to shifting to a new place. And he says, that is something that has stood me in good stead even today. He said, I did my engineering elsewhere. I was outside. I kind of worked elsewhere. And, everywhere I went, I was supremely adaptable, right? So his adaptability is what he was talking about. Someone else spoke about the fact that he studied in a vernacular medium. He studied in Telugu medium for the first 10 years. Then, his parents, they came from a smaller city, smaller village. And he said, it is, I can't blame them. Maybe it was their ignorance, but they wanted the best for me. So they sent me to Hyderabad. They sent me to a school where, they kind of put me on a boarding because they wanted me to study for IIT, for engineering. And he said, for me, as a 15-year-old, that was a big shock leaving my house, getting into a new program, and he was also made fun of because he spoke differently. His English was not very fluent. In fact, he had just started learning. He said, all of this put me on a back foot. But that day, I decided I have two options in front of me. Either I can take this to be my fate or I can fight it. And he said that day, as a 15-year-old, in my mind, I made the decision to fight it out. And he said, that is what I present to a B school. I present a guy who's a fighter, who never gives up. Correct? So these are the kind of stories that B schools are also looking for in candidates, right? They are also looking for these things. Doesn't mean that this is the only story. You still need to get a high GMAT score, correct? So there is a qualitative measure. There is also a quantitative measure to the whole thing, right? So couple of examples of personal background. So the first one, he basically was part of his family business. His family business went through kind of bad times. He comes from a traditional Marwari business family. He said, for me, apart from college, I used to spend 6 hours working on the business while all my friends were partying and hanging out, doing cool things, right? I used to kind of help my father in his business, but that is something that I did willingly. And, that's an experience that I've had that has shaped who I am. One of them started a band, put music and collected royalties from Savan. Great story. And he actually distributed it. He actually said, whatever money I'm going to make, because my salary, my 9 to 5 job is affording me the comforts of my life, every extra income I'm going to have, I'm going to give it to a cause. Someone had a very unfortunate incident, in their family. And the way is not to portray yourself as a victim. Something bad happened to me. But to say, look, something bad happened to me, but that's not my point. My point is to show how I was able to bounce back, how I was able to show resilience in terms of my character in order to achieve what I wanted to in life, correct? Again, examples of people who started on their own but failed, correct? Now, people think I should not talk about failures. I can tell you, failure teaches you 10 times more than what success can teach you. Because when you are success, you know what went right. You are not prepared for what went wrong. But failure is that thing that actually prepares you for greater challenges in life, right? Again, someone was an aspiring professional cricketer. He went on to play the Ranji Trophy, which is a big deal in India, right? If you play the Ranji Trophy, but partly because of politics, partly because of injury, he was not able to continue his career. And for a person who dreamt of playing for India from the age of 12, almost till the age of 20, correct, 18, 20, that can be a pretty significant blow. So he again said how he was able to bounce back, how he was able to take, come to grips with his life and career, correct? So I hope, this kind of helps you, this kind of gives you a sense. Make sure that if you are writing your essays, you have a strategy to show who you are personally, apart from answering the questions, right? So you can talk about the professional part, but I think there is a very important personal part that also needs to be part of the overall message. Now, I know that a lot of people have asked saying, Arun, I have a particular profile, I would like to know, for example, we have someone who's got great background, 770 GMAT, and is applying to various programs. What are the do's and don'ts? Tanay, my suggestion, especially HBS 2+2 is not a deferred program. Yale SOM also has something. So what you're looking at is not necessarily a deferred program. I would suggest at this point, you apply, you don't need to convince them. All you need to do, if you have less than 2 years experience, if you're still a college student, correct? Tell them why you have gained significant experience while you are in college. Maybe it was a business you started. Maybe it was, part of a team at college where you gained exposure. But I am going to say why I am as good, if not better, than a person with work experience. Correct? So 770 great GMAT score might take. All these deferred programs are looking at smart people like you. You don't need to justify why you are going for a deferred program versus a conventional program. All you need to tell them is why you think you have the experience and why they should bet on your potential. Correct? with people with under 2 years experience. Remember, they are betting on your potential. You need to show them markers that will tell that you are on course for meeting, your life goals. So that's where question, Tejas also had the question. So Tejas, I hope I answered that. But I want all of you to kind of have a look at it. Shikla, if you can just put it in the chat window, the actual link. Yeah, so she's put it over here. Excellent. So if you can just go ahead and, fill out the form over there, we will get in touch with you. We will make sure that we give you a personalized so now that you have understood our depth of experience, I hope this webinar was useful. I hope you were able to learn and what I said at the start, which is, the idea that, my intention was to transfer whatever I know based on my experience onto you in this 1 hour, 20 minutes. All right. So I will let Shrikla take questions which are specific about our application services package. So we have various packages where we help. We work very closely with students. In fact, I personally also work with students. But in case you are interested, please, get in touch with your contact at CrackVerbal so they can help you with that. I just have this one question. I'm just going to take 2 questions. One question is about TOEFL scores. Can you help us identify? Divyanshu, great question. I'm going to make a note. Let me just go ahead and try to create a blog, list of schools where TOEFL score is required. So just give me a couple of days. By next week, I will try to create a blog, and you should be able to get that. Siddharth, there is discounts for people, including people who have attended. So please go ahead. As I said, get in touch with the team. We will have something for you. Someone asked, do you provide a study plan for retakers? Yes, in fact, we have a lot of retakers, because the thing with retakers is typically they have either done self-study or they have joined a coaching. They are not very satisfied with that. Now what happens, they come back, they say that most of the programs out there seem to be programs that are intended for people starting that preparation. But as a retaker, your set of challenges are very different, because you have already done the theory, but there is a problem with your approach. There is a problem that requires tweaking. So the particular online program that I was talking about, the retakers program, we will be letting you know about it. In fact, please attend tomorrow's session taken by Aditya, especially on this topic about retaking. I'm pretty sure you would find it very useful. All right. And just one thing on this, which is Shavil had this question, which is last question: does pre-undergrad work experience, blah, blah, blah. Okay, here is what work experience counts. A, it has to be full-time. B, it has to be after graduation. C, it has to be a paid position. Now let's take articleship. Post-graduation, yes. Paid, yes. Full-time, yes. So you can take that as work experience. But let us say you are in 10th standard and you did, let's say, part-time work. That does not count as experience. You are in college and during, your off time you worked and you got experience. That is not. It is always considered post-graduation. All right. So thanks so much, all of you. It was great interacting with you. I hope this webinar, you found it useful. I was able to add value. Please make sure that you attend tomorrow's session also. Shrikla put it in the chat window. We'll also be following it up with an email, but hope to see you in tomorrow's webinar also. Have a great weekend. Thanks so much once again for joining me in today's session.